Thank you very much for your participation this afternoon. I hope that continues during the panel. We wanted to talk about how Labuan can assist businesses and private families in the ASEAN region, especially with the advent of AEC. And what I'd like to do is actually ask a first round of questions to the panelists, and then if anybody has any specific questions or anything, just put up your hands. There'll be mics floating around, so you can ask away, yeah? Okay. So I don't have to share with you the importance of the Asian Economic Community. Clearly, it's going to be the third largest. We've got a question already. Good. It's going to be the third largest potential market after EU and North America. More than 600 million people in this economic community. So there is a lot to be said for all of us being in ASEAN at this momentous time, you know. I think this is a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us all. I actually wanted to go back to Jennifer. I hope you're not tired. Good. About the bit when you were talking about how Labuan can be used. For the uninitiated like myself, maybe it's the profit center. You know, how do you use Labuan as a profit center? How do you then use Labuan to enter the different markets within ASEAN? How can Labuan actually offer a currency-neutral, tax-efficient operating environment for a business going regional?
Okay. Is this on? Yes. Yeah. Well, I think in terms of currency, first and foremost, Labuan is not even supposed to be transacting in Malaysian ringgit. Yeah? So all Labuan entities are supposed to be transacting in foreign currency, right? So first and foremost, it could be US dollars or euros. Anything so long as it's not in ringgit. So I think that already sort of takes care of the currency issue, right? And I think secondly, in terms of how can Labuan be used for the ASEAN region or making profits on investments, I would say that a few of the more popular use of Labuan is obviously for investment holding. Okay, so if you're expanding into various regions, then setting up a Labuan company to make investments into those various countries in ASEAN. Right, I think that's something that's been fairly popular over the years.
So you're like using it as a hub almost?
As a hub, yeah. As an investment holding structure. Or it could be a fund, quite a lot of funds that were mentioned just now as well, for investments around the world. So that has been done as well, yeah.
So in those situations, I guess when you're divvying up the dividends, it's not taxable, is it?
It's not taxable at all, yeah. Okay. We've had some clients obviously using the Labuan company as trading company. So I think the gentleman over there mentioned about buying from China, selling somewhere else. Yeah. So that has been fairly popular as well, right? So you basically set up a Labuan company to buy and sell.
Yeah, so box standard trading.
That's right. I mentioned just now also the last year or so, one of my colleagues have been working a lot with PwC China, and they've set up at least 12 companies by now, buying and selling aircrafts.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So obviously, using it as a springboard into doing some of these transactions.
Okay, thank you. He's just leaving the room now, actually. I wanted to talk about commodity trading. But fine, that's fine. So for David, I have a separate question, but the flip side. So today the panel is a little bit, it talks about two bits, yeah? So you talk about trading companies, you talk about corporates and the commercial side of it, but we're also trying to talk a little bit about the private client side of it, so a little bit about wealth management. And so my question to David really is, you know, if you had, which Labuan solution is your favorite? Which Labuan solution? And don't give me a single word. You're going to give me a single word answer, I know it.
Okay, no. I'm going to give you a 5-minute answer if I can use the whiteboard.
Please. Yeah, fine. Go for it.
I don't need the mic.
Shall I bring it forward for you a little bit, yeah? Okay. There you go.
I think there are a lot of tax and trust lawyers in the room. And obviously there are very, very popular products like the Star Trust, like the Vista Trust. But what I like to say, of course, is everything that you have elsewhere, all the bells and whistles you have actually in Labuan. I'll just quickly run through that, right? If you look at Asset Protection Trust, in Labuan you have Section 11, which is equivalent to 13B of the Cook Island, what we call the Asset Protection Trust. Right? For those of you who are familiar, in Cook Island, which is the most popular jurisdiction, there is no clawback period. Wonderful. If you set up a trust today, it is good against the whole wide world. That is the best asset protection trust in the whole wide world. Everybody else has copied Cook Island. Section 13B of the Cook Island International Trust Act, you have exactly the same wording in Section 11 of the Labuan Trust Act. Right? The Labuan Trust Act, 1996. And I say you have exactly the same because I copied it, word for word, from the Cook Island. You have what is Section 11A, which is the Star Trust, right? Everyone is familiar with the Cayman Islands Star Trust. Section 11A of the Labuan Trust Act, again, exactly the same. The Purpose Trust works exactly the same as the Cayman Star Trust. So those of you who like the Cayman Star Trust, it's a wonderful vehicle. You have exactly the same thing in Labuan. Section 46C, you have Vista, right? Those of you who like the BVI Vista Trust, in Labuan we call it the Special Trust. Section 46C, word for word, the same as the Vista Trust. So whatever you have, Asset Protection Trust in the Cook Island, Star Trust in the Cayman Island, Vista Trust in BVI, you have exactly the same in Labuan. Why? Because we're very good at copying. There's no point reinventing the wheel, you just copy it. Those of you who like and say, I have all these offshore trusts, I like settlor to retain control, what we call retention of control by the settlor. Again, Section 8B, you have retention of control by settlor. That's what we call settlor retention. Again, everything you see in BVI, in Cayman, Jersey, retention of control, you have. And by the way, all these actually, retention of control by the settlor, was all copied from the Cook Island. So it's not that we're not the first people to plagiarize. Actually, everyone plagiarized from the Cook Island. So everything you have elsewhere, you actually have in Labuan. The greatest advantage, I say, of Labuan is location, location, location. You can get to Labuan within about 3 hours. So if you have a private jet, you can fly from Hong Kong into Labuan within 3 hours. Breakfast in Hong Kong, fly into Labuan, have lunch there, you can be back in time for dinner. So all the bells and whistles you have also in Labuan. Now again, you have obviously the Labuan Trust Act. Some people say, I like the Liechtenstein Stiftung, the foundation. Again, you have the Labuan Foundation Act, 2010. Was exactly like the Liechtenstein Stiftung. Although I personally think there are drawbacks to a Liechtenstein Foundation, but that's another matter. But you have foundations. If you like foundations, Labuan has foundations. Now, someone I think mentioned that you could, because Singapore doesn't have foundation laws, you could have a Labuan Foundation but managed out of Singapore. I do not suggest that for a moment. Because if you manage that Labuan Trust, a Labuan Foundation out of Singapore, you will end up paying 17% tax. Right? Why? Because I've asked MAS, I say, obviously for foreign trusts, what we exempt foreign trusts from taxation, it is not clear that foundations are exempted. So if you manage a foundation in Singapore, you are running a risk of 17%. Massive risk. Don't do that. That's another disadvantage for actually foundation. Singapore doesn't have foundation laws. There is one drawback, and I think far too often we talk about all the nice things, we never talk about the horrible things. The biggest problem with Labuan, and the one I hate most, we have Section 42(6)(b). Right? This has to do with exemption. These are trustees' exemption, and those of you in the room are trustees. When you act as a trustee, you want to be exempted from everything under the sun. Why? Because it is a massively risky job. Section 42(6)(b) in Labuan, unfortunately, is not as wide as the equivalent of 19E. Right? Cook Island, again, where everyone copies from. 19E is a wonderful exemption clause for trustees. In Labuan, we don't have that wide ranging. And that is the reason why, as a trustee, I will not choose to go to Labuan and do this, unless, of course, they amend it like 19A. And again, I clamored for that. I didn't draft this clause. I hate this clause. I think if you want to attract trust to Labuan, attract trustees to go to Labuan, I think we should get rid of 42(6)(b) in Labuan. So before I get shot, I better sit down.
Just very quick question, because it's very popular, of course, for many clients. What, just in 2 words or 3 words, can you just give some practical use and what the difference? Because about purpose trust is very little actually, and in LTA, really, you know, it's yeah. Can you just comment?
You could have a star trust in
Yeah, I can read that, but you know, it's really interesting that you know the difference is quite difficult to understand. Honestly, I'm just you know from the difference is, of course, using special trust and purpose trust.
What is the difference?
Yeah.
A visitor trust is essentially where the settlor retains control. So, for example, he sets up the trust, he hands over the assets to the trustee, but he still continues to manage the business, essentially.
Just only is it in the company because trust.
In the company, obviously. So if I'm the patriarch, well, I say I want some asset protection, so I can transfer everything to a trust, but at the same time I say, well, I'm the one who knows this business. What on earth do the trustees know about my business?
Yeah.
Right? If I hand it over to trustees, they'll muck it up. They wouldn't know the difference about my business, so why don't you let me, the director of that company, remain in control of that trust, essentially. That's the business trust.
It means that a purpose trust really very close to foundation
Yes.
principle, yeah?
Purpose trust, now again, I don't want to bore the rest of your non-lawyers. In English common law countries, you cannot, generally speaking, have a non-charitable purpose trust. By non-charitable, for example, if you have a pet dog, you're in a Hensley, and you want to create a trust for that pet dog, normally English law prohibits that, but for specific animals, cats and dogs, they allow that. Maintenance of graves, saying prayers, you know, chanting to your graves for the next 21 years, that's allowed. But very specific cases. But generally speaking, for non-charitable purpose trust, it is forbidden. So in some countries where you ask yourself, you know, what is charitable, non-charitable is very difficult. Very often it's a thin line. In cases where you have star trust, they say it doesn't matter whether it's charitable, non-charitable, it is a purpose trust, it's okay.
So actually that allows us to talk, to move on very quickly to foundations, which is another solution available in Labuan, which I think, Irina, you have a little bit of experience with. And I wanted to just try and understand from you, what's your take of the Labuan foundations and the kind of response you've received from your clients with regards to it?
We just started, to be honest, with Labuan Foundation. And so far, it's actually quite a good experience, I have to say. But again, you know, I just really have to listen also from people who have experience, because we normally use Dutch stichtings, and that's where we really have experience. As for Labuan Foundation, of course, you know, a lot of people, particularly from the countries like Russia, because I just really, you know, work with some Russian clients. For them, of course, Labuan foundations are very attractive, again, because they are revocable. But, okay, they're revocable. But from other side, you knew from your experience that that is actually good from one side to attract the client, but actually that is not as good as to look at the assets which are in that foundation. And particularly with Russia, for example, that's a good example because, you know, they have new CFC rules now that is actually has to be excluded in a charter, that particular irrevocable clause. Yeah, that's really, you know, as I said, I only started now with Labuan Foundation. So far, I really see that the market is actually, people are interested in that. We shall see how we go.
Thank you. And at this juncture, I was wondering if there are any questions from the floor.
Okay. I'd like to ask Labuan about the position on innovation. How do you handle a fintech company dealing with digital currency and cryptocurrency? What would be an asset on a cloud? What would be the positioning of Labuan for this for taxation?
That's a very interesting question. And it's a very interesting question, especially at this point, because I know for a fact that the regulator is looking into it. I don't have an answer for you at the moment, but it is an area we feel that we need to be part of very quickly. I'm sorry I haven't got a direct answer, but maybe we can come back to you once there is something a bit more structured there. Thank you for that. Dr. Nico, are you allowed to ask a question?
Question. Does it work, this? No, I have one question, and I don't know who would answer that. Most of our clients always want to have their cake and eat it. Now, Labuan offers an ideal opportunity for that. You can create something, and you can unwind it, and you, or you can change it again, and that's very nice. But I'm a civil law lawyer, as you or some people know, and one of the systems I always have been using, if somebody creates a structure by which he protects his assets, you can get a court order against that person on the basis of a penalty for every day that he doesn't oblige, that he doesn't comply, to reverse that structure, which basically means that structures in Labuan, for people who think like that, are completely useless. Maybe the panel can comment on that.
And I tell you why, because Cook Island has the most experience of anybody when it comes to facing these sort of court orders. And obviously their 13B was designed precisely for this reason.
No, the court orders are against the settlor, and not against the
yeah, but obviously the trustees, so long as the trustees and the assets are not in the jurisdiction, and very often you have the US settlors, and again the US courts will have a court order against the US settlors and say, bring these assets back into the US. Yeah, but if the US settlor, again, I mean the Anderson case is very, very famous, the US settlor can say, well, I've got no control over this trust. No point ordering me to bring these assets back. If I have no control over these assets, the assets are already in the hands of trustees in the Cook Island. Now, so long as the assets are sitting in the Cook Island, there's nothing a US court can actually bring it back. And that is the case of the Anderson case. And again, there's some famous trust companies in Singapore who've been through precisely this. So it is not a problem where it is properly structured. It is a problem, obviously, if your assets are sitting in the US, then obviously the US court will seize those assets. But if it's outside of the US, in fact, actually Cook Island Asset Protection Trusts are designed precisely for this one issue. And as I said, Cook Island has a lot of experience on this.
Thank you. Any other questions? Because I've got a question. Any other question? Okay, I wanted to bring the conversation back to tax, to corporate and tax. We've been talking about wealth management, private client issues. I wanted to come back to tax, the move towards transparency, obviously, the increased requirements that will be soon upon us, if not already. And I wanted to actually ask one of our service providers here in the room about how they offer substance creation to their clients in Labuan and what has been their experience there. I wanted to call on Linda to see if she might share some of the experience with us. So for your information, Linda represents Kensington Trust. They're one of our trust and corporate service providers in Labuan, and they do offer a substance solution to their clients.
Thank you for this. I'm not part of your panelists, and I'm being included.
No, but this is supposed to be a discussion.
Well, I think the requirement for substance is definitely growing, as what Jennifer was mentioning, worldwide. So Labuan, together with the authorities, have taken the step forward, basically, to emphasize on substance. And they're the only authority that I know has actually come forward to all the service providers and start speaking to everybody to make sure that we can offer such requirements. So in Labuan, being a very small island, the infrastructure that we can offer is usually the office spaces, manpower. Of course, manpower depends. Some of our clients prefer to hire their own staff, which we assist. We are not HR people, but we work with recruiters in trying to find employees for our clients. But we can provide our office spaces. We have a very unique proposition in Labuan where we built an extra block next to our main office, and then from there, our clients can rent the spaces in that block. They have a separate address, each of them, separate mailbox. So it is different, it's separated from the registered office of their Labuan company. Then they have bank accounts in Malaysia. We work with Maybank, CIMB, Hong Leong Bank, Public Bank, mainly the local banks, because the local banks do provide the facilities for the actual trade. Of course, lately we have Al-Habib. Is it Al-Habib? Yeah. Yeah, Al-Habib Bank, and they are quite strong in providing trade facilities. I mean, they're offering that. So for those companies who are looking to get gift getting the gift license, these are the facilities that they will require. And with that, they can actually show proof of their substance. And we do encourage our clients to have their board meetings at least once a year in Labuan. And if Labuan is just a tad too difficult for them to get to, then Kuala Lumpur is actually the next best stop. We have had meetings actually at the KL International Airport. We actually rent the Pan Pacific hotel boardroom there. Yes. Everybody just fly in from all the way from Canada, Hong Kong, and Singapore. We just meet at the KLIA airport. We have a full board meeting there, minuted everybody, minuted the meetings, and then copies of their passport and the boarding pass that they actually landed in Kuala Lumpur. And with that, we produce the information to the tax authority and we get our tax residency certificate. So that helped with our clients. They are willing to do that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the other thing I wanted to just, actually Jennifer, maybe you can take this one. There isn't actually a minimum or maximum substance requirement in Labuan as described by the regulator necessarily, is there?
No, currently there isn't anything formal, but generally in terms of if you want residency, obviously the tax authorities would want to see at least a bank account in Labuan. Yeah. They're not looking at this stage at the office and lots of people running around in Labuan. Bank account, board minutes, board meetings, those sort of things. Yeah.
Right.
But I think this is an issue which I think that our tax authorities are also very well aware of. Yes. So they essentially may come up with some form of guidelines as to what would be good practices to have. Yeah. Okay. But so in terms of regulatory, they're not saying that you need to have certain things.
There isn't spelt out.
Yes.
No? Yeah.
Right.
Not at the minute anyway.
That's
yeah.
Right.
Okay. Are there any questions from the floor? No? Okay, there is a question, and I'd like to ask this to someone in the room actually, because she's also a trust and corporate service provider in Labuan from Hans Trust. I wanted her to share some of her experience in redomiciling foreign companies into Labuan actually. Sue, are you in the room? Yes, Sue.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Actually, redomicile of foreign companies, especially foreign offshore companies into Labuan, is getting more and more popular, and due to the tax evasions concerns in the respective tax authorities. And based on our experience, probably I will just briefly share with you about the whole process of redomiciling the foreign offshore companies into Labuan. So, for instance, a company that's incorporated in British Virgin Island in year 2013, let's say, assuming it's 1st January 2013, and this company eventually decided to redomicile to Labuan. So what we will do is there are two major stages that we will go through. We will go through. The first stage will be the initial stage of compiling all the necessary informations, and those informations upon completion, we will submit to Labuan Financial Services Authority. And the authority will conduct the necessary due diligence, and after the approval is granted, a document which is called approval in principle will be issued by Labuan Authority. So this certificate, which is called approval in principle for registration into Labuan, this certificate will be issued by Labuan Authority, and this copy will be sent to the trust company in British Virgin Island, for instance, and the trust company in British Virgin Island will be able to submit such letter or certificate to the authority in BVI. So subsequently, a separate certificate will be issued, which is called the deregistration certificate, will be issued by BVI authority. Assuming that the date of deregistration is on, let's say, 1st of June, on the current year, which is 1st of May, we are still in May. So 1st of May 2016, all right? So in this case, this certificate of deregistration issued by BVI authority will be presented to Labuan authority in order to register the company into Labuan. So based on the real situations, most of the time the deregistration certificates will only reach Labuan probably a few weeks later, or maybe 1 or 2 months later, right? So once we have received the certificate of deregistration and submitted to the authority, it's actually on the date later than the deregistration, the actual deregistration date in BVI. So in such situations, Labuan Financial Services Authority is actually very considerate and very supportive, whereby the certificate of registration will be dated the same date as the deregistration date in BVI, even though the certificate actually reached Labuan much later. So I think that is, I will say, is a great consideration from Labuan Authority to make sure the company that has been deregistered has been properly registered in Labuan on the same date, so there's no gap of disputes on that. And also there's another important point that I would like to share is in terms of what is the effective incorporation date of the company. As I quoted just now, a BVI company that is registered on 1st January, let's say 2015, and is redomiciled and registered in Labuan on 1st May 2016, right? So in such situations, the incorporation date of the redomicile company will remain the same as if that is registered in BVI, which is on 1st January 2015. Yeah, so there's no confusion arising when those companies are presenting the redomicile documents to the relevant parties, such as the bankers, etc. So if, let's say, the BVI company is having a bank account, existing bank account with one of the financial institutions, or have entered into any contracts with any parties, after the deregistrations and also re-registration into Labuan, all the contracts and bank accounts will still be valid. And you just need to present an updated copy of information to the bankers to update.
So it's pretty seamless then?
Yes, so it's a very simple process.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes?
Let's say when a client decide to have a Labuan Trust. Before that, the client may want to evaluate which trust company could be more suitable. Then can the panelists share with us what are the most important 3 factors you believe that a client should consider when they choose the trust service provider? Thank you.
No, I was going to bar you from answering that, actually.
The most important thing, the trustee must wear bow tie.
That limits your choice to that gentleman over there, I think. Anybody, Jennifer, do you want to, because you seem quite impartial, you're probably the most impartial, seeing as Irina's probably got a trust company license in the works and David's already got one. I think, Jennifer, you're probably the only one objective enough to answer, I guess.
Well, I think we do have clients asking us, who to choose, and really we don't really sort of like say this is the best person or whatever. I think at the end of the day, it's who you're comfortable with, yeah? Because I think the trustee's role is very important. So obviously, number one, that trust company needs to have the experience of having done something similar, right? So for example, if you're deciding to set up a trust for certain things, it's important obviously to choose a trust company that has done it before, yeah? Done it before, the experience, can share with you the war stories. Obviously, that's very, very important. Secondly, obviously, a lot of our clients will say the fees. You want to choose someone that gives you reasonable fees. Of course, it can't all be cheap, the cheapest or whatever. It has to be somebody that has got the experience plus reasonable fees as well. Yeah? So,
Most expensive.
yeah. So maybe he's expensive because he's got a lot of experience. So, yeah. Yeah. So you may want to go with him because he's got the most experience in this area, for example, that's able to give you a very seamless service. So I think those are the most 2 important things that most of our clients would go for. Yeah. And the other thing, of course, the third thing is obviously the ability to advise you, I guess being impartial and having the ability to advise you on various jurisdictions as well, the pros and cons and all that sort of stuff. I think that's also important.
Yeah. But if you are interested, there is a list on our website with contact details of all of them. Obviously, we're not allowed to recommend any one over the other.
Linda has very nice offices.
Linda's got very nice offices, yes, that's true.
And I guess some clients like to choose trust companies that are not just local, like maybe Malaysian clients don't mind choosing a trust company that's just very local, just one office in Labuan. But a lot of international clients will tend to choose trust companies that at least have got offices in a few other places, so that at least they've got that international knowledge. That's another thing that some of our clients look for as well.
Yeah, and also some trust companies tend to do a particular line of business better than the other. So they're not all homogenous in that sense. It's best to call them and see, to kind of get a feel as to their level of expertise in each industry, I guess. Are there any other questions?
Needs answering sometimes. We hear a lot about automatic exchange of information, about transparency, and about all that sort of thing. We find in our practice that none of our clients is actually interested in that. They don't come to us because we're transparent or that we are automatically giving all their information to other people. They don't like that, and they don't want that. So the question is, what does the panel think about the future of this development? Don't ask.
Should Irina answer this?
Yeah, to answer that, I can go on and on and on, because it's such a sensitive, you know about tax sensitivity. It's a very important, interesting, and question I think everybody can discuss in this room. My first question talking about transparency, how other countries are actually ready for that. And that is my main question, and that is my main concern. How other countries are ready for that? If we're talking about transparency, which is already just next door, yeah? 2017. And to me, it's really very important, that, when I'm thinking about our client, how we actually move them with transparency to the authorities. We disclose and we actually make our client naked with all his assets behind. But how countries, how tax systems in a lot of countries actually are ready to use that information in the right way. I'm talking about political misuse. I'm talking about, you can go on and on and on, but the question is really how other countries are ready to use this tax information for their taxpayers, and how actually media will use that information to make a show for all around the world. We had that just recently with Panama Papers. I suddenly heard our name in the New Zealand Parliament. I never dealt with Panama. I never knew the jurisdiction. I never worked about it. Suddenly I heard that I have a client there, actually. It has been mixed. It was a mistake. But the word already gone. And that's the important information, how we are ready for all this transparency. Another day I wanted to Google to actually to search on shareholder in Accra. Accra just changed the website. Yeah. In New Zealand I can do that. And I really needed to do that in Singapore. There is no, I don't know, maybe I'm mistaken, I don't know, maybe somebody can help me. It took 15 minutes to explain to the person on the phone what actually I mean and what I actually want to achieve. She could not understand even the question. At Singapore, the first country in the world for easy doing business. New Zealand is behind, actually. Yeah, and I really like to work in Singapore. It's excellent. It's everything is just, great. But search for shareholder. Try to find that information. We're not ready.
Do the other panelists have anything to say about this question? Could we limit it?
Obviously, we had our own data theft 3 years ago. And I tell everybody, I have absolutely nothing to hide. These journalists went through 30 years of all my emails, my internal records. And I say, if you cannot find anything that I've done criminally wrong, that's not a bad internal audit. And I tell everybody, when it comes to transparency, when people say, should we be transparent? I'm the first person to put up my hand and say, let us have full transparency. We have nothing to hide. In fact, the people with something to hide are the people most terrified of transparency. And I say this because obviously the world is moving towards a public register of companies and trusts. I'm all in favor of a public register of beneficial owners of companies. I see absolutely no reason why we cannot have that. And I tell everybody we are testimony that there is life after death. All our information is out there. Even my poor old daughter, one of her friends called her. I've got a 21-year-old daughter. Her friends called her, God knows why they were looking at these things. And they said, gosh, I saw your name there on the list. Now, some idiot journalist went as far as to say that we were the Singapore branch of Mossack Fonseca, which is completely untrue. We've never, we do everything internally. We never outsource any of this to Mossack Fonseca, so it's completely untrue. Some of these journalists have taken our data 3 years ago and mixed it with the Panama Papers, and obviously has confused everybody in the process. Obviously, these are journalists who don't know any better. And again, I say, even for Panama Papers, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with having an offshore structure. And thank God for the first time, MAS has come out and said, you know, there's nothing wrong with having an offshore structure. There's something that's perfectly legitimate. Many, many people do things perfectly legitimate offshore. So I hope I haven't taken more than
No.
1 second.
No, I think they confused you with another P, trust company with another P. But never mind, let's not go there. Okay, are there any other questions? Oh,
Oh no, it's just such a question, such a subject which, as I said, I can go on and on because, you know, I'm the same as David has been heard by media going 20 years ago, actually much more when you are. Yeah, but anyway, that's not, the point is our privacy, I think it's really our human rights. And how we are going with that, to me, it's a really big question. And again, we're talking about globalization, we're talking about tax. We work with the families who are global, who is doing business around the world, yeah? That's the point. And if we're dealing with families which have business around the world, the tax issues come straight away. If client wants to create a structure, foundation, or trust, or even a structure for trading, which the client is doing, the tax comes just straight away, hand to hand, to the main needs of our clients. That's the point. And because we don't have global tax rate, and every country has different tax systems, the tax issues come straight away to the question. And countries and jurisdictions, they compete with the tax for, you know, in tax issues for business and for investment, yeah? That's the point. It means that in our situation when we are global, it is very difficult to say that some, you know, as I said, you know, to me, you know, to have international structure is just absolutely normal because so many needs for that from big, large families. But now people put that such a way that transparency means to be honest. And that's really, you know, the question, is it the right things to put things together? That's, you know.
thank you. Are there any questions? No? Well, before we end the panel, maybe Jennifer and David, any parting words?
Actually, well, since you asked me, you know, we were in Hong Kong together.
Yes, we were.
We're here. And I was actually amazed that when we were in Hong Kong, nobody mentioned One Belt, One Road. It is one of the most major things going to happen. And I would have thought that a place like Hong Kong, a place like Labuan, has a huge role to play in One Belt, One Road. A lot of Chinese companies actually can make use of Labuan to go offshore of China. And I think it would be a huge mistake actually if they don't wake up to this possibility.
I believe there are plans to wake them up.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's in the works. Thank you for that. Jennifer?
I think what you've mentioned about China, I think we're beginning to see that as well. That's why I mentioned about how my colleague has been setting up at least 12 companies doing trading. So there's a lot of potential. I think Labuan can play that role, not only with China, with ASEAN. I was just reading yesterday, in fact, the company with the highest growth potential, in fact, is Burma, Myanmar, number one. Yeah, so that's another, you know, country that potentially can be targeted, and Labuan can play a role. As you can see, we've got pretty good double tax agreements with ASEAN. So obviously Labuan, I think, you know, we've got the laws, we've got legislation, the tax system is pretty competitive, and substance can be created. I think it's a very good potential for Labuan.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my panelists. I really enjoy the honesty and the sharing, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. On behalf of Labuan IBFC, thank you very much for your presence here today. Thank you.